So there are some disadvantages to crowns, but otherwise, they're quite important things.
The moment did not arrive with celebration. There were no public statements, no formal acknowledgement broadcast of the world. And yet, within the quiet structure of royal protocol, something significant had already taken place. Because when the question of inheritance surrounding the late Queen Elizabeth II's private estate was resolved, it did not follow expectation. It followed design. And at the center of that outcome stood Princess Charlotte. To the public, the monarchy continued its usual rhythm. Appearances were made. Engagements carried on. The familiar image of continuity remained intact. But behind palace doors, the redistribution of legacy had already begun to reshape internal dynamics. Because this was not simply about property. The estate in question represented privacy, influence, and long-term positioning within the royal framework, assets that extend far beyond land or wealth. And now, that influence had been quietly aligned with the next generation. At the same time, the presence of Queen Camilla carried its own layer of complexity. Public composure remained unchanged, but within royal circles, expectations had shifted for members connected to her extended family. The outcome disrupted assumptions that influence might gradually expand in their direction. Instead, the decision reinforced a different principle, one rooted not in proximity but in lineage. What made the moment particularly striking was its silence. There was no confrontation, no visible disagreement, only a narrowing of access, a subtle recalibration of position. Because within the monarchy, power rarely announces itself directly. It moves through structure, through legal clarity, and through decisions made long before they are ever understood by the outside world. Observers who understood royal precedent recognized the pattern immediately. This was not an emotional decision. It was an institutional one. The estate remained tied to continuity, secured through mechanisms designed to preserve legacy across generations. And in that framework, Princess Charlotte's position was not symbolic. It was strategic. As discussions quietly unfolded within advisory circles, the broader meaning became clearer. This was part of a larger evolution, a monarchy preparing itself for the future by reinforcing its foundations in the present. The next generation was no longer simply being introduced to responsibility. It was being positioned within it. And so, while the world continued to see tradition, ceremony, and stability, a quieter reality had already taken shape. Influence had shifted. Expectations had adjusted, and without declaration or spectacle, the future had moved one step closer. Carried not by announcement, but by design, the moment did not arrive with ceremony. There were no official bulletins, no carefully worded palace statements, no sudden interruption of the public narrative that surrounds the British monarchy. And yet, within the quiet architecture of royal protocol, something deeply significant had already taken place. Because when the question of inheritance tied to the private estate of Queen Elizabeth II was resolved, it did not follow speculation. It followed structure. And at the center of that outcome stood Princess Charlotte, a figure still young in years, but now positioned within a legacy far greater than her public role might suggest. To the outside world, nothing appeared unusual. The monarchy continued to present its familiar image, measured appearances, controlled messaging, and a steady projection of continuity. But behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, a more subtle recalibration had already begun, because the estate in question was not simply a matter of inheritance in the traditional sense. It represented autonomy, long-term influence, and access to resources that shaped the internal balance of the royal institution. And by aligning that estate with Princess Charlotte, the monarchy was not just preserving wealth, it was reinforcing direction. Within palace circles, the implications were understood almost immediately. This was not a spontaneous decision, nor one driven by personal preference. It reflected a carefully structured framework built over time, one that prioritizes continuity of the direct royal line above all else. In that context, the involvement of Prince William becomes central. As a direct heir, his influence over long-term planning extends beyond public duties and into the strategic preservation of royal assets. The decision surrounding the estate, therefore, was not isolated. It was part of a broader vision, one that quietly integrates the next generation into positions of significance earlier than expected. Meanwhile, the presence of Queen Camilla added a layer of quiet attention to the moment. Publicly, her role remained unchanged, composed, measured, and aligned with the institution. But within the private dynamics of the monarchy, the outcome carried different weight. For those connected to her extended family, there had been an unspoken expectation that influence might gradually expand over time. The estate, in that sense, was seen not only as property, but as a potential gateway to deeper institutional relevance. When that possibility was removed, the shift was felt not through confrontation, but through absence, because within the monarchy, influence is rarely expressed openly. It operates through access, through proximity to decision-making, and through the quiet authority that comes with control over resources. When those elements shift, even subtly, the effects ripple outward. Conversations change, expectations adjust, positions are reconsidered, and all of it happens without public acknowledgement. Observers familiar with royal precedent recognize the pattern clearly. This was an institutional move, not a personal one. The estate remained within a framework designed to protect legacy across generations, ensuring that it could not be redirected or diluted by external influence. In that framework, Princess Charlotte's role becomes more than symbolic. It becomes structural, a position that secures continuity while quietly shaping the future balance of the monarchy. At the same time, the decision reflects a broader evolution taking place within the royal household. Under the reign of King Charles III, there has been increasing emphasis on a more streamlined and focused monarchy, fewer ambiguities, clearer lines of responsibility, a system that prioritizes efficiency while maintaining tradition. The placement of key assets within the direct line of succession supports that approach, reducing uncertainty and reinforcing stability over time. Within this evolving structure, the roles of the younger generation are beginning to take on new meaning. They are no longer seen solely as future figures. They are being positioned quietly and deliberately within the framework that will define the monarchy in the decades ahead. For Princess Charlotte, this moment represents an early connection to that framework, not through public duty, but through legacy, a form of influence that operates beneath the surface. Inside advisory circles, discussions reportedly centered not on reaction, but on alignment. The decision had already been made within the legal and institutional boundaries that govern royal inheritance. What followed was adjustment, a recalibration of expectations and roles based on the new reality. And while no disagreement surfaced publicly, the shift itself carried undeniable weight. As time moves forward, the significance of this moment may become clearer, not because it was announced, but because of what it represents. A monarchy that is not waiting for transition, but preparing for it in advance. A system that moves quietly, but with intention. And a future that is being shaped not through sudden change, but through decisions made long before they are fully understood. In the end, this was not a story of conflict. It was a story of structure, of continuity secured through design, of influence transferred without spectacle. And as the public continues to see stability, the deeper reality remains that within the quiet corridors of power, the next chapter has already begun. The shift did not end with the decision itself. In many ways, that moment marked only the beginning of a deeper internal adjustment, one that will continue to unfold quietly within the structure of the monarchy. Because once an estate of that significance is placed under the future line, the effects do not remain isolated. They begin to influence how authority is perceived, how access is granted, and how the next generation is prepared for roles that extend far beyond public visibility. Inside Buckingham Palace, the tone of internal discussions gradually evolved. Meetings that once focused purely on ceremonial continuity began incorporating longer-term strategic thinking. Advisors were no longer looking only at the present structure, but at how the institution would function years, even decades, ahead. And within those conversations, the positioning of Princess Charlotte was no longer viewed as distant or symbolic. It was becoming part of a broader framework of continuity. For Prince William, this development carried a different kind of responsibility. His role had already been expanding in visible ways, increasing engagements, greater diplomatic presence, and a more defined voice in institutional matters. But this shift added another layer, one that operated quietly beneath public awareness. It connected his immediate responsibilities with long-term legacy planning, linking the present leadership of the monarchy with its future stability. At the same time, Catherine, Princess of Wales continued to play a crucial balancing role. Her presence in public life remained steady and reassuring, offering a sense of familiarity that softened perception of internal change. While structural adjustments can sometimes appear distant or technical, her approach ensured that the monarchy remained emotionally connected to the public. In that balance between structure and sentiment, the institution found stability during a period of quiet transformation. Meanwhile, the position of Queen Camilla remained outwardly unchanged, yet internally more defined. The boundaries of influence, once fluid in certain areas, had become clearer. This clarity did not create visible conflict, but it did reshape expectations. Within royal systems, where proximity often determines relevance, even subtle changes in access can carry long-term implications. And in this case, those implications were understood without needing to be spoken. What makes this transition particularly significant is the way it reflects a broader shift in how the monarchy approaches its own future. Under King Charles III, there has been a growing emphasis on purpose, accountability, and relevance. The institution is no longer relying solely on tradition to sustain itself. It is actively refining its structure to align with modern expectations, a process that requires both experience at the top and preparation just beneath it. Within that dual structure, the role of younger royals becomes increasingly important. They are not simply being introduced to public duty over time. They are being integrated into the framework of continuity at an earlier stage, ensuring that transitions, when they come, feel seamless rather than abrupt. The positioning of Princess Charlotte within this context reflects that approach, a long-term investment in stability rather than a short-term adjustment. As weeks pass, the effects of the decision continue to reveal themselves in subtle ways. Engagements are planned with greater coordination. Responsibilities are defined with more clarity. The overall structure of the monarchy appears less ambiguous, more aligned. None of these changes are dramatic on their own, but together they form a pattern, one that points toward a carefully managed evolution. Observers who follow the monarchy closely have begun to notice this pattern, not as a single event, but as a series of connected decisions that gradually reshape the institution from within. The state, in this sense, becomes